Sweet Christmas, we just watched a heck of a lot of Luke Cage. We have binged our way all the way to the end of the 13-episode debut season on Netflix. And if you haven't yet gotten to the end of Luke Cage, get out of here. We don't want you until you have watched it because we're going to spoil the crap out of it for you. So,
Call in sick.
Without further ado, I want to get into probably one of the biggest spoilers in season 1 that I made a point to not talk about publicly, which is that Diamondback is the true villain, I would argue, one of the main villains of the show, but also Luke's half-brother, which we find out about halfway through the season. He sort of has this revenge quest on Luke because he blames him for everything bad that ever happened to him. How did you feel about that storyline and Diamondback's integration into it? Because as people who have read my review of the season know, that to me was the thing that probably worked least for me about season 1.
I think by the time you get there, you realize that all of the conflicts in the series are personal. Domingo knows Cottonmouth, like they all grew up together, they've all known each other. That one threw the audience and through me because you're like, hey, wait, this, Luke's from Atlanta, he's from here. You didn't see the connection, but clearly Diamondback knew him. You're like, wait, what's going on? And so I think that one felt like a curveball because he didn't seem part of that Harlem ecosystem where everybody knew each other and each of the characters had their own reasons for not getting along with each other. I didn't mind it once it started. He was an odd character. Just
all his Bible quoting and
he felt like a character that Tony Todd should have played, and I love Tony Todd, but that's who he reminded me, the actor, but also the portrayal reminded me of how Tony Todd would play it. Although I thought the guy was really good in it, but it was odd at first, and then I got used to it. And I was like, oh, okay, everything's personal in this world. Like there's no, I'm a superhero, I'm a bad guy. It's like no, these people are there's stakes that are personal and there's stakes that are big and. Threw me for a loop, but it was fine.
To me, I think this is one of the rare cases for my personal preference that I think it could have benefited from more flashbacks and more exposition. I kept waiting to care more about Luke and Diamondback's relationship, Willis Stryker, his half-brother, and we did get some of those details, but I felt like the show did such a good job laying down the groundwork for Cottonmouth and Mariah's story and their history, which we'll get to them in a minute because I think they're some of the best parts of this season. But for me, I felt like Diamondback maybe came a little bit too late in the season and all the way up until the end with their fight scene, which I feel like I get what they were going for, but that final battle didn't quite work. And even like how Luke got the win because he chose not to go for hate, which again, on paper, I really like the message there, but I thought that in practice, it didn't work as well as it could have.
Well, I think that with the Cottonmouth and Mariah storyline, there was a lot of lead up, and you started at the beginning kind of that story, and you kept moving. With Luke's past is a history up until episode 4 to the most part, and even after episode 4, you're still getting a couple of layers peeled back. Diamondback shows up with no backstory. People have been talking about him since the beginning, but he had a lot less time to build up his storyline, and he also had a lot less time to build up his kind of conflict with Luke. So if, like you said, if it had started earlier, then the payoff would have been a little bit bigger. Like, it's that, and this is going to happen. Whereas when you finally understand that these two characters are related and why they're upset at each other, it's episode 10 by that point?
Yeah, it's pretty late.
It's late, so the emotional stakes aren't there. But once you understand why, I'm still kind of invested, and I'm trying to figure out is he going to kill this dude?
So that to me, I think that a trend across all the Marvel Netflix shows is they don't always stick the landing, probably because they know that there's going to be something else that comes next. Yeah. With Luke Cage, we know next is Iron Fist and then the Defenders. So there are a lot of loose ends in the finale that I'm assuming will get resolved by the time Defenders rolls around. But I did think that it was interesting with Diamondback that, once they had that cliffhanger with the doctor who kept all of Luke's files, and I'm like, oh, you want Luke's DNA so you can do these experiments. Oh, he has a half-brother. Obviously you're going to try and do the same experiment. Yeah. I expected that to happen this season, that Luke maybe would have to fight a fully superpowered Diamondback then. But it does seem like that's the cliffhanger for either Luke Cage season 2 or Defenders or something.
Well, remember in Jessica Jones, it was pretty much towards the end of the season where you start finding out where her powers are coming from, which they totally kept as a mystery. They gave you a hint at it, they pointed you in the right direction, and they kind of let it go. And I think we got a little kind of the tease of this in the same way here, where it's like, okay, it has to do with that, but We'll get to that when we get to it.
We'll get to it eventually. We
We'll
have
get
a
to
lot
it.
of other stuff to deal with. So let's talk about Cottonmouth and Mariah. I kept writing, first of all, round of applause.
Two great
Mahershala
actors.
Ali and Alfre Woodard, incredible. Episode 7 was my favorite episode of this season, which was when we find out about everything with Mama Mabel and their history together. And then when she finally snaps and kills him, I was so surprised. I kept finding him to be really ineffective as a villain, which I was like, why is he your main villain? Oh wait, you're killing him. He's not your main villain. How did you feel about how they played that out?
Yeah, I figured something was up because I knew that Diamondback was going to be in it. They hadn't announced it, hadn't really shown much of him, and I said, okay, well maybe he'll be bigger in a different way, and this is they're two-tiered villain type of thing. But Cottonmouth was almost in some point, and once you get there, you realize he's a kind of a reluctant villain. He wants to be like Mariah. Mariah's acting like him in some ways, and you see that more at the end where she's like, he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, but I am totally comfortable with. So she comes to him, and he's almost coming to her at the time of his death. But that scene between the two of them is probably the emotional core of the entire series, because I was watching like not just the physical violence, but just the whole backstory. It was really rough, but it was also very heartfelt, and you really got a really good understanding of both of these characters and who exactly both of these characters were. And Emmys.
Yeah, finally, right? Finally paying attention. I did think it was so interesting that they both ended up being forced into positions where they're the opposite of their true nature, right? He's not cut out to be the crime boss that Mama Mabel wants him to be, whereas she's very much her grandmother's granddaughter, walking in those same footsteps, but she's denying that in herself because she only wants to see something better.
She was raised to be in a particular lane, and they both fell into the roles that they were slotted for, whether they wanted to or not, and whether they were the best at that or comfortable. Like, he clearly wanted to be a musician. She seemed like she wanted to do what she was doing, but it may not have been her true nature. But it was definitely, and even with Luke, Luke does not want to be a hero.
Right.
He's the only one who's really bucking what everything is telling him to go in the direction to, until, not unlike Jessica Jones, where they finally get to a point where it's like, okay, enough. I need to, protect the people around me, but also other people need help. So.
Yeah, I do think, as much as for a time I viewed this series as the great tragedy of Cornell Stokes, I do think it's very much the story of saving Harlem, and I really appreciated that in Luke Cage. I mean, obviously, Daredevil was more out to save Hell's Kitchen, though I think with the hand and everything that came out of that, season 2 was bigger in scope, but Jessica Jones is also very much a personal story. This, I think, is the most personal of any of them. If you contrast it with the MCU movies, where it's like saving the universe, saving the galaxy, this is very much just let's save the neighborhood. Did you find that effective?
Harlem is a character in the show. Hell's Kitchen, in the Daredevil comics, Hell's Kitchen is a character in there, and you get a lot. You didn't get as much of that in the Daredevil series. And Jessica Jones in her series, it's more about her personally. There's a cast of characters, and Harlem is the other character in it. And there's so much real Harlem in there. There's so much real New York in there. It was nice seeing Fab Five Freddy at the end of the series, which was crazy. But there's so many real people. Like Dapper Dan shows up, who's a Harlem celebrity. There's all these people talk of the Apollo, and it feels grounded. The characters all feel like they're from there. They know each other in some ways. Or they know somebody that, like Misty, and she knows Pops, and Luke knows Pops through different ways, and they're all kind of connected in loose ways. It's just like, oh, this is kind of it's not as big of a story as we've seen, especially Daredevil season 2, which is like gigantic. But it was definitely more personal, but definitely more intimate, I think, than we've seen, probably on the level of Jessica Jones, even maybe more so because of how personal all of these relationships are. Where it's intimate as far as showing her and multiple sides of her and her pain. This is like, everybody's business is on the table, and everybody is connected in some way.
And I feel like it's a story unlike we've seen before. As much as Jessica Jones really got into what it's like to experience abuse and hit upon real issues there were so many scenes in Luke Cage that just were completely evocative of conversations we're having today about, black kids getting gunned down in the street by cops, and Cheo Coker, the showrunner, has talked openly about how, you know, it's really special to have a and important to have a bulletproof black man as your superhero here. And I'm curious, I mean, to me that still remains the biggest conversation about Luke Cage. And I think that, you know, we talked at Comic-Con many times why this feels like the right superhero for the right time right now. And as much as I jumped to Diamondback because we finally could in this video, I do think that's the most important conversation to be had. We at first had just seen the first 7 episodes. Now we've seen the full season. With that sort of as the thesis for why Luke Cage is special, do you think that this series sort of landed that side of the story?
It's perfect timing. What's nice is they don't hit you over the head with it. They present it in a bunch of different ways. It's not a central theme, but it's something here's the thing. I don't feel like it was made to be part of the show as a cautionary tale or like an explainer or anything like that. They just showed a very real and natural slice of life, and these things happen. And they show how these things happen, and they show them from a bunch of different angles. They show it from a just regular person's angle. They show it from a police angle, from multiple types of police angles. And you see how these things happen in a different way, and you get a lot of different perspectives on the same thing. And you get to see a slice of black life that you don't usually see on TV, and you definitely don't see in a superhero show, where 9 times out of 10 we're probably sidekick or the second partner or something like that. This was a very different type of show. I mean, I haven't seen a show like this, and a lot of people compare it to The Wire.
Yeah,
and
I've
I
been
think
seeing a lot of
it's
those
just
comparisons.
maybe in visual aesthetic and grittiness, but it feels more like New York Undercover to me, which also took place in New York and had a very specific feeling of the town was also a city in there, I mean, a character in
You're
there
right.
as well, and the characters felt natural to that environment, and it dealt with topics that were going on at the same time. This is kind of more, and also music being a big part of it. Like that to me was the biggest parallel among others. But I mean, they feel like shows of their time and shows that are showing a reality that is real. It's not like, oh, I watched this movie and it takes place in this thing, and I don't know, it's now or 10 years from now, or I don't know these people. Like, I know these people. These people are very familiar to me, and I think they're very familiar to a lot of people. And you see a lot of different cultures and backgrounds and different types of people that you're not used to seeing as leads or as even primary characters or supporting characters. So it's the right show at the right time. As far as, I mean, I couldn't see it getting made 5 years ago.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. You hit on something I think is really important too. I feel like it very easily could have pointed fingers or said this is the problem, or taken maybe more of a stance. But I think in just laying everything out on the table, and you were right, like they don't, as much as there's that scene where Luke Cage gets spotted in what is clearly like a more upper class white neighborhood by 2 police, and you can say, oh, well, that's, you know, evocative of many of the similar scenes we've seen play out in real life. You also get Misty talking about how I just want to protect people, and I'm that person as a cop who gets like, you hate me until you need me. And I think that it was really important
Until you know me.
Yeah, that too. But like, you know, you'll be on the opposite side of me and antagonistic toward me until you do need me. And I think that was a really interesting counterpoint there. And it was funny, we were talking a little bit about this beforehand, but some of it probably Cheo Coker didn't even know that it would be as timely as it ended up being. Like, he didn't know that during Trump's debate, like the week that this show came out, stop and frisk would be a huge talking point, and there's a whole episode that deals with the police basically doing stop and frisk with a bunch of people in Harlem because they want to find Luke Cage.
And and I actually like that conversation with where Dillard, where Mariah brings it up as well about, you know, although she's using it for personal reasons, but she was talking about like, we can't just, you know, this is still my neighborhood and I can't unleash this on people like that. And you also get it from the police side. The lieutenant also speaks about it as well when she's talking to her officers. Like, hey, and again, maybe it's for her own personal reasons. She was like, I don't want to see this on YouTube, you know. So they address it in a lot of different ways without being preachy or like ham-fisted. Like I don't like it when people just like, here's an issue, and they just show it in an organic way so people can understand
Start
it instead of people being like, oh, this is the part where they talk to me about something I'm supposed to care about. No, they was presented in such an organic way that didn't take you out of the story, that made people that may not be interested in any of these issues be like, oh, you know.
I came here for the superhero. I'm now like invested in the issues.
And if you're not watching the show because of the aesthetic, you're missing out.
I will say the one time it did take me out of the show a little bit was when Method Man shows up. Now, we're going to talk about the music after this, but I did want to bring this up as a transition piece because this came in episode 12. If you didn't get that Wu-Tang Clan is a huge influence on this show, by episode 12, hopefully Method Man arriving made it clear for you. But maybe it's just that I've been covering this show fairly extensively and I've heard Joe Cocker say the line about, it's important to have a bulletproof black man. So to have Method Man say that, I was like, is this some lack of confidence that people won't get it? Because you've been doing a really good job of making it clear. That one scene with Sway was just, and a real World One alum who Eric
Heather
called
B.
out. Yeah,
Heather B. She's part of the show. She's Sway's co-host.
Yeah, that to me was, I was like, a bit too on the nose. I got it before then, but maybe other people did not.
I think that they set the Luke Cage show in a 100% real world environment. If this were the Warner Brothers universe, you have Star City and you have Metropolis and Gotham, which are kind of fictional versions of New York and Chicago and different cities like that. This one, and even Marvel's New York is not traditional New York.
Right.
They use the real names, but they're always slightly fictionalized. This was setting a fictional character in a real neighborhood with real people, and they put as many real elements in there. And I felt like when you're watching it, I'm not taken out of the element that this is a superhero show until Hammerhead shows up at the end. But I mean, it's like there were so many real people in there playing themselves or playing versions of realish people, and I felt and like Fat Five Freddy and Method Man and Dapper Dan and people showing up, and you're like, oh, it grounded it for me, and it made it a little more real for me. And I felt like if this were actually real, that would totally happen, and it would totally be somebody from Wu-Tang Clan freestyling on the Sway show about the bulletproof dude.
Oh, I love this. I love the rap. I love the freestyle. It was just the long conversation, articulating all the points that you should take away from it. No. I will say, though, that scene in the liquor store after Luke saves Method Man was perfect. You're you. I was like, yes, that's exactly how this would happen. You're both celebrities in your own right. Okay, so let's talk about the music. This is so a part of the show's DNA that Gangstar song titles are the name of every episode. I'm not going to lie, I am not well versed in the history of rap and hip hop, especially in the 90s, so a lot of this went over my head, but talk to me a little bit about why this is important and why it was the right call for Luke Cage, especially since Cheo Coker was a music journalist before he was a showrunner. Yeah,
he wrote for Vibe for years. I like that they picked, because of the age of the characters, and Luke Cage looks to be somewhere in his 40s. This is the music he would have listened to. This is the music he would have grown up with. This is the music that Cottonmouth would have grown up with. And even, this is the music that Mariah would have been telling Cottonmouth to turn down in his room after school. This is the music of the era of those people, so it totally fit. I'm glad that they didn't do something super current and like, hey, let's have a bunch of trap people on here. Like, that would have... there's another movie right now doing that, and I don't know how well it's working. But I think they picked the right era, and they picked the right types of music. Adrian Young is a genius, and he did the soundtrack with Ali Shaheed Muhammad from Tribe Called Quest. So it has a very distinct sound. If you saw Black Dynamite and you heard that soundtrack, that score, I should say, not the soundtrack, the score, that's Adrian Young did that as well, and he has a very 70s TV show sensibility.
Yeah, and that really imbues the show with that sort of vibe.
There's a lot of quirky synthesizers and stuff. The live music is great. The music that played in the club, like having real bands play.
That was something I really loved.
Jadena, and having multiple artists there, classic and older and newer, I think gave it another layer of realism. As this is. It's not current Harlem, but this is Harlem for these people, and this is the music that they would be listening to, this type of club, and I think it gave it a very timeless sense, even though it's not current, and I think you can watch it in 10 years like, oh, those are classics.
Yeah, and I did like that they used the club as Harlem's Paradise as one of those primary settings through which they could do that. Like they could, even when Cottonmouth died, Diamondback still had performers at the club, and they had people coming through. And when it wasn't subtle, but one of my favorite shots and pieces of imagery from the show is the way that Cottonmouth would constantly be framed in front of the Biggie portrait, which is just like, it's so telling, not only in how music influenced these people, but you get it. You see that shot, and you're like, I get it. You view view yourself as king of Harlem, which I was called out on that. Yes, I know Biggie is not from Harlem, but that's still the imagery there.
it's the whole, and Biggie was like framing himself as Frank White from King of New York. So, he's the Black Frank White. So it's the King of New York. It's even bigger than he sees himself as King of Harlem, but he's thinking big. He's like, this is my area, and I'm the king, and he's always, overseeing the entire club. And Diamondback comes in and does basically the same thing. So can we talk about when it takes a turn and turns into a superhero show?
It happens pretty late in the season.
And I didn't mind it, but it was, like Daredevil took a while. He's running around in his ninja pajamas and he's doing his stuff. And you're like, oh, okay. And then he gets the suit and you're like, you already feel like it. He's wearing a mask, which already makes you feel like this is a superhero show. Luke's wearing regular stuff. Luke's wearing, there is the Easter egg with him wearing the old 70s
and he even
suit.
he asked them to do some research on his tiara.
The
tiara. Or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, click on tiara. And it was funny because that scene was funny because you got to see how ridiculous that suit looked. But for the most part, he wears different versions of the Luke Cage costume, the hoodie or just the shirt. But when you get to full Diamondback at the end, not 2/3 of the way through Diamondback, when you get through full Diamondback,
hammer tech suit,
yeah, he shows up and you're like, oh, this is comic book stuff, and we're about to see a classic Marvel fight, and it was funny, but it was definitely a slight gear switch, but also it was nice that they kept with the Justin Hammer thing and they kept that going on. I was waiting for him to pull that fake-looking arc reactor out of his back, and I was like, just pull the reactor out.
I know, when he had the power glove and everything too before then. It is interesting because one criticism I see leveled a lot at Marvel Netflix shows that are not Daredevil is, why are the fights not as good? And I took a big issue with this in Jessica Jones, and I take issue with it in Luke Cage too, because I don't think that's something that you can comparably compare between these shows. Daredevil is a martial artist. Like, his fight scenes are incredible because that is very much his style of fighting. Jessica Jones and Luke Cage are super powerful, but with not a lot of training. Like, Luke is a boxer. We see him training. He played football and stuff. He's all brute force. And Jessica, too, she just happens to be incredibly strong, and so she doesn't have a lot of grace when she goes around and does her fights. I think focusing on, well, the fights aren't as good, misses the point of what Luke Cage is doing as a superhero that is distinctly different from these other characters.
And like you said, these are super-powered characters. This isn't Daredevil. My only beef with Daredevil was the kind of parkour flips he would do every now and then.
Because they look so cool.
Those were not my favorite. The rest was fine.
The hallway fight scenes.
The hallway fight scene was awesome. Just when he does a flip. But these are different types of, and they're very high-powered superheroes. So it'd be like, hey, I saw that movie with the Thing and the Hulk, and I didn't like the way they fought. Like the fight at the beginning of the Edward Norton Hulk movie. Like, you have two brawling giant superpowered masses. It's not going to be graceful. It's not going to look like, something out of a Nolan Batman film. It's going to look like two really big people slugging it out. And that's how they fight. They're going to throw each other around. They're going to use as much of their strength as possible because they're probably fighting somebody else superpowered. Or if they're not, they're going to be taking on a whole bunch of people at the same time.
And I love that scene where he's going into
Crispus Attucks?
Yes.
Look him up.
Yes, and it's so imbued with Black history here between the writers and the Malcolm X on the street corner and stuff like that. There's a lot of really cool history to pull apart and peel back the layers on. But yeah, when Luke is going through and he is that's my favorite fight scene from this whole show. And that's why I thought, yes, it veered into being more of a superhero comic book show at the end, but I did think that final fight with Diamondback was a bit of a letdown. It wasn't as badass as that earlier shot.
The Crispus Attucks scene that was Luke Cage's hallway fight.
Yes.
Easily. And it is a little more enjoyable because he's up against these amazing odds, and it's a million, and yeah, he's bulletproof, but you're like, it's like a million dudes, and he's just like, and in the same way where Daredevil had a little harder fight because he's, there's a bunch of dudes in there, and they're all coming at him and they've got weapons and stuff. So it's kind of similar. It was an against all odds thing. With Hammerhead, with Diamondback, you don't know exactly what you're getting into in that scene. You see the suit, you already know he has the superpowered gloves, but you don't know what the suit can do. And then after a while, I saw the helmet, I thought Juggernaut. And And then once they start fighting, you're like, oh, this is like a traditional superhero, really a superhero brawl.
Brawl, yeah, in the middle of the street.
Which was fine. I mean, they went from gritty to full comic book, and they dialed it right back.
My
really
biggest
quick.
problem, and greatest, like I was at the very end of a binge that I was like writing, watching, reviewing, watching.
You were in the cage.
And so I got to that point and I had to go back and rewatch that scene like 3 times to figure out what exactly happened to allow Luke to win. I felt like it was a very sort of meta commentary packed into this fight. And I was like, I get it, but could you have done that a little bit better?
Yeah, once you get to episode 13, you kind of throw Grace out the window and just like, look, we got 22 more minutes to fill. Let's wrap this up.
Let's talk about the ladies of Luke Cage, because Misty Knight and Mariah Dillard are 2 of my very, very, very favorite new characters to be introduced to the MCU on 2 opposite ends of the spectrum. But Misty in particular, I'm like, okay, please can she be an Iron Fist? Because Simone Missick is so incredible as that character. I think episode 2 was the one where I was like, oh yes, please, more.
Yeah, you get invested in her story very quickly. She really sells it. She's a great actress, Simone. But it's also, she's an interesting character. And also that's another thing about this show that's so good and similar in other ways. I mean, I think all of the Marvel Netflix shows are the same, where they're basically like the Marvel Knights comics, where they're kind of a little more adult-oriented, stuff like that. But these are all flawed characters. I mean, if you've read the Daredevil comics, you know that there is no bigger train wreck in all of Marvel than Matt Murdock. Don't ever date him, ladies, please. Nothing good will happen. But Jessica Jones is obviously super flawed. Luke's flawed, but especially all of the other characters. But Misty is flawed, but she's always trying to do better, and she's always trying to go forward, like Pop says. And she's a super engaging character. She's always trying to fix her flaws as she goes along. And her partner joking around at the beginning I liked a lot of that stuff until I found out he was corrupt, and I was like, I'd totally watch a buddy cop show with those 2. And I was like, oh, he is totally
it could be a prequel.
Yeah, exactly, a prequel. But I mean, I'm happy to know she's going to be in Defenders, and we'll wait for Heroes for Hire announcement.
Were you expecting them to go the full way with the metal arm? Or were you surprised they pulled back at the end?
Not off the bat. Once they cast her as a police officer, I didn't think they were going to go in that direction at all.
When they shot her, though,
and then
I was
when
like,
they
are
shot
you guys
her,
going to do it?
and Claire stitching her up, I was like, she's going to get infected. We've already seen.
Well, even what she said, she's like, I'm going to tie up the nerves, but if it takes too long, then you're going to lose use of that arm. And I was like, you're going to lose use of that arm.
There's still. I'm not hoping this happens, but there's still time for permanent nerve damage. Just saying. And then they know Justin Hammer. Maybe he can help them out.
Right.
Maybe they can go to Tony Stark.
I feel like they should go to Tony Stark.
Because I feel like if you're working with a Justin Hammer, I would have loved to have seen a Justin Hammer tech glitch in one of those fights. That would have been the greatest thing ever.
I just want to compare and contrast his sort of career in suits to Tony Stark's, and the Iron Man suit is the sleekest, coolest thing, and then you have this.
Hammer time.
But let's talk about Mariah as well. I mean, as much as she was bucking the Black Mariah name, which was her comic book name early on in the season, I would argue that we get our Black Mariah, who's basically the kingpin of Luke Cage here, and I look forward to her causing more trouble in the future.
I love that this was almost an origin story for her, in the way that in Daredevil in season 1, you do get a building of the Kingpin, but he's pretty much the Kingpin at the beginning of that show. He just hasn't revealed himself to that.
Right.
She is still becoming who she is in the comic, and I like that they've taken some kind of the fringier, crazier characters of the Luke Cage universe that when you see them on the original comics and on paper, they look ridiculous. And they have made them into interesting, engaging, and fully fleshed out people. And when you see the end of the show, you're like, I can't wait for her to come back.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm glad that nothing happened
that fits
to
you. And it's her holding the gun. The gun is super personal to her for multiple reasons, all of them terrible. But it was very interesting. It's nice to see a show with this many totally fleshed out characters. Even the little kid who turns out to be the lawyer's son, who shows up in multiple shots to come and film, and he's doing the video thing, and he's doing YouTube, and he shows up to kind of help Luke in a couple places, and he has the interaction with the other police officer who has some very personal reasons for trying to rough him up, and there's no throwaway characters in this.
Well, I was just about to say, if there was to be one throwaway character, it would be Shades, who was Theo Rossi is great. Juice
Rossi
was
is
great
great.
on Sons of Anarchy. But that was a character to me, I was like, you didn't do that much. And also, I think Claire Temple, to me, is a character who, because her development is stretched across now 3, or I guess she was in Daredevil
She was in
season 2.
She's been in everyone, yeah.
She's been in all of them. I just don't think they've done that much with her because she's sort of a conduit and a means to an end. And we're running out of time, but I personally was not all that crazy about her and Luke getting together. Even though it's from the comics, I thought it was a little bit ham-fisted in the show.
Yeah, I wasn't crazy about having them because of their interactions throughout the rest of it, where I didn't feel like they had gotten there. Like it didn't feel, it felt rushed.
They held hands.
It
Now
felt
they're
very
getting
Black
coffee.
Widowy. But as far as Shades, he was more, and they used both of those characters in the same way where they were connectors. And I still feel like Claire is a fully fleshed out character, and I enjoy her the minute she shows up.
I definitely enjoy having her on the show.
Yeah, I'm happy to have her. I think Shades is a still in development character, and I feel like we haven't seen the end of Shades, but also we haven't. There's more that they can build on there, you know.
So I am definitely excited to see more of Luke Cage, and we only have to wait until next year when the Defenders, maybe he'll appear in Iron Fist 2. We did get that Colleen Wing Easter egg that's maybe connecting things all together, but definitely do not need to wait long for more Luke Cage. My last question for you before we wrap this bad boy up, though, do you think Pop's Barbershop is going to become the Heroes for Hire headquarters?
That is an excellent observation. And I don't see why it wouldn't.
They even make a comment. They're like, it clearly doesn't want to be a barbershop, but I see this space being important, things to come. And I was like, Heroes for Hire. It's definitely, I think it's going to happen.
It was nice seeing Ron Cephas Jones. If you watch Mr. Robot, it was nice seeing him alive.
Don't jinx it. Anything can happen in Marvel.
But yeah, I think that there's definitely plans for that location, especially, we really only see like 4 locations, and one of them, the Chinese restaurant, got blown up. So we're down to like 3.
Yeah. So that's what we thought about Marvel's Luke Cage. We definitely want to know what you thought about it, so let us know in the comments below. Check out our reviews of the entire season and every episode.
Terri worked hard on them.
I worked really hard on them. And for all things Marvel, Netflix, and Luke Cage, keep it here on IGN.